1783 1830. In the 18th century, Spain's Bourbon monarchs sought ways of increasing the flow of revenue from their American colonies. Spain needed more money to defend its empire from European rivals, particularly Britain and France. Pressure was placed on the colonies to increase production in agriculture and mining, and equally to reduce administration and defense costs and expand frontiers. This led to discontent among the Creole population, those of Spanish descent born in the colonies, made worse by Spain's attempts to monopolize commerce with European and American markets at the expense of Creole traders, and by increasing Creole exclusion from positions within the colonial administration in favor of peninsulars, Spanish born Spaniards. By the late 18th century, many Creoles had grown resentful of Spanish authority. Influenced by the ideas of the Enlightenment and the American and French revolutions, they began to desire independence from Spain. However, few Creoles rebelled because of fear that without Spanish protection, they would be unable to defend themselves from uprisings by the African, indigenous, and mixed race communities, which together comprised some 80% of Spanish America's population. Their fear was reinforced by two events: the 1780 Inca uprising in Peru, led by Tupac Amaru, and the 1791 slave revolt in the French Caribbean colony of Saint Domingue, which led to the foundation of the African Caribbean Republic of Haiti in 1804. The event that changed Creole attitudes and accelerated moves towards independence was Napoleon's invasion of Spain in 1808. Napoleon replaced the Spanish Bourbon King Ferdinand with his own older brother, Joseph Bonaparte, causing a major conflict of loyalties throughout Spanish America. Did they recognize the new king, pledge allegiance to Ferdinand, or form self ruling governments? In most cases, Creoles preferred the third option, as a temporary measure at least, until Bourbon rule was restored. Mexico and Central America. A war of independence began in Mexico in 1810, led by the priest Miguel Hidalgo. After Hidalgo's execution the following year, the movement was led by the military commander Agustin de Iturbide. By 1822, Iturbide had driven the Spanish royalists from the country and founded the Mexican Empire, with himself as emperor. Around this time, Spain's Central American colonies also declared their independence, forming themselves into the United Provinces of Central America. The union lasted until 1838, when it separated into the independent states of today. Brazil. As in the case of Spanish America, the catalyst for independence in Brazil was Napoleon's 1808 invasion of the Iberian Peninsula. The French occupation of Portugal prompted the Portuguese Prince Regent, later João VI, to flee to Brazil. When the French were driven out of Portugal in 1814, João elected to remain in Brazil, raising it to the status of a kingdom equal to Portugal. However, when his government tried to return Brazil to colonial status in 1820, the army decided to lead the revolution in 1822, declaring Brazil an independent constitutional monarchy under Joao's son, Pedro I. Pedro I reigned 1822-1830. Spanish South America. Two figures dominated the story of South American independence. In the north, Simon Bolivar led the struggle to free present day Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. In the south, Jose de San Martin fought for independence for Argentina, Chile, Bolivia, and Peru. Bolivar began his fight against Spanish royalist forces in 1811. After many fierce battles, he established the independent Republic of Gran Colombia in 1822. In 1831, Gran Colombia separated to form Venezuela, Ecuador, and New Granada. In 1816, Argentina declared its independence from Spain. José de San Martin realized that if Argentina was to remain a free state, the rest of the continent would have to be liberated as well. In 1817, he invaded Peru over the high Andean passes, surprising royalists and defeating them at the Battle of Chacabuco. Inspired by San Martin's example, Chilean patriot Bernardo O'Higgins invaded Chile in 1818, defeating the Royalists at the Battle of Maipú and securing the country's by independence. By 1821, San Martin had taken Peru's capital Lima and proclaimed independence, although most of the countryside and highlands remained under Royalist control. San Martin asked Simon Bolivar to complete the liberation of Peru, which he and his general Antonio José de Sucre achieved at the battles of Junín and Ayacucho in 1824-1825. Upper Peru, which declared its independence in 1825, renamed itself Bolivia in honor of Bolivar. Paraguay, in northern Argentina, achieved liberation in 1811. In Uruguay, which lay between Brazil and Argentina, independence was proclaimed in 1816, but the country was then occupied by Brazil in 1820 and only managed to liberate itself in 1828. By 1826, the last royalists had been driven out of South America, and the once mighty Spanish American Empire consisted merely of Cuba and Puerto Rico. The U.S. government's Monroe Doctrine of 1823, which declared U.S. hostility to any European attempts to recolonize the Americas, guaranteed the continued independence of Central and South America. A little bit of a timeline here: 1880, 1808, the Braganzas, Portuguese royal family, flee to Brazil. 1810, 1811, Miguel Hidalgo begins Mexico's War of Independence. 1810, 1814, independence movement in Chile is defeated. 1819, Simón Bolívar founds Republic of Gran Colombia. 1823, the USA recognizes newly independent states and proclaims the Monroe Doctrine. Okay, that was some history for you guys. Thank you so much for leaving your comments. Kiki says this is a Bible. Yes, it's a Bible of history. And now let's talk about criminals. And our criminal for today is Idi Amin. Here you go. Okay, let me adjust this thing. There you go. And now let's have a read about this. When Milton Obote in 1962 became the first prime minister of newly independent Uganda, he had to forge his country's 40 independent tribes into a new national unity. These required finesse, but also, on occasion, brutality. And for brutality, he increasingly relied on the deputy commander of his army, a semi illiterate ex heavyweight champion and sergeant in the King's African Rifles, Idi Amin. Amin was a Muslim from a minority tribe, an outsider with no loyalties to any particular power bloc, nor indeed to a body. For in 1971, he took power himself in an army led coup and almost immediately started killing the officers who had helped him. Gathered together in groups under various pretexts, they were variously violated to death, crushed by tanks or blown up by grenades thrown into rooms locked from the outside. The severed head of the murdered chief of staff found a home in Amin's freezer. When two Americans, one a journalist, got wind of this wholesale slaughter, they were simply disposed of. Amin was soon demanding Amin was soon demanding massive injections of cash from Britain and Israel. He got none, and within a year, with all its stocks of dollars and pounds reserved for Amin's own use, Uganda was bankrupt. Only money from Colonel Gaddafi in Libya kept it afloat. This meant having to toe Libya's political line. This means having to toe Libya's political line. Amin then began a prolonged tirade. Amin then began a prolonged tirade against the state of Israel. Israeli engineers working on construction projects were thrown out of the country, and an office of the Palestine Liberation Organization was opened in Kampala instead. Amin, warning to his task, started to express his profound admiration for Adolf Hitler, and even set up a domestic version of Hitler's Gestapo, the State Research Bureau, filled with hundreds of highly paid killers. Gaddafi's money, though, was not enough to guarantee the loyalty of all those Amin had to buy. So in August 1972, he announced that he'd had a visit from God, and God had told him that Uganda's Asian population, most of them professionals, merchants, and shopkeepers, were at the root of the country's economic troubles. He gave them 90 days to leave the country, and when they fled, he handed over their businesses and shops to his cronies, who inevitably ran them into the ground. Once more, they had to be paid, and the only commodity Amin had left to deal in was the lives of his fellow Ugandans. Ugandans have a profound respect for the bodies of the dead, and this is what Amin began to trade on. His state research bureau were licensed to kill anyone they chose, and then to offer their services to the victims' families as body finders for as large a fee as they would charge. The families were told that their sons or husbands had been arrested and were feared dead. They were then led, sometimes hundreds of them, at night to the dumping grounds in a forest outside Kampala. Unclaimed and therefore profitless, bodies were simply dumped into Lake Victoria. Water balloon, high water balloon. When the French embassy complained about the constant gunfire coming from the Research Bureau's headquarters, Amin and his bureau chief invented a new variation of the production line. One kidnapped prisoner was offered his life in return for bludgeoning another to death with a sledgehammer. Then he took the second prisoner's place. It was only with the famous raid at Entebbe airport when Israeli commandos rescued the passengers of an El Al aircraft hijacked by Palestinian gunmen that Amin was finally exposed as an international pariah, and his reign of terror came to an end. Even then, though, he had one more trick up his sleeve. In a last attempt to get the support of his countrymen, he announced that Tanzania was getting ready to invade, an invasion that he did his best to provoke by sending raiders across the border into Tanzanian territory. When the Tanzanians did finally respond by sending their army into Uganda, it was welcomed with open arms. Amin fled to Libya and then subsequently to a private hotel suite in Riyadh. Suite. Amin fled to Libya and then subsequently to a private hotel suite in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia, courtesy of the Saudi royal family. He died still in exile in 2003. Excellent. Thank you so much for being back there, guys. Please share this content every day. I try to read a piece of history, philosophy, and crime. So thank you. Bye bye. See you tomorrow.